So I saw the band GWAR a couple weeks back, and this was right before the whole thing with Perez Hilton cutting himself up, which I also saw. It's kind of a strange juxtaposition to go from the fictionalized gore of GWAR to the real deal like that. And I think the Perez Hilton thing might have rerouted my thesis on this video in some ways, or at least added some context. So we'll see what happens. I'm also going to consider GWAR through the lens of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's similar to what I did in my wet leg video from several months back now. But if you don't know the band GWAR, or you do know them, but you haven't seen them in a while, then stick around because I've got footage and pictures from their recent show here in Knoxville. We're going to talk about what they're doing these days in their current lineup, which, by the way, no longer includes any founding members at this point. We'll discuss why GWAR's brand of violence, and maybe fictionalized violence in general, maybe real violence in general, why it appeals to so many people so much. Is it living vicariously? Is it catharsis? Is it something more spiritual going on? I guess we'll try to find out. So, for those who don't know, GWAR is, for lack of a better term, a heavy metal rock band from Richmond, Virginia. They've been around since 1984 and basically operate on a rotating roster from a larger arts collective known as Slave Pit, Inc. If you've seen them live, then you know they look like hideous monsters, and in addition to playing very aggressive music, they also perform a lot of aggressive theatrics. They basically indulge in what amounts to mock sacrifices, largely of American political figures, which often results in a literal raining of blood down upon the audience, whose fans, or slaves in the context of the GWAR live experience, are known as bohabs. These are people who have come with the expectation to have their clothes ruined by fake blood. That's not me, by the way. I stay back. Now, the lore of GWAR is not that they are monsters, but that they're actually aliens who were part of an ancient barbarian force known as the Scumdogs of the Universe. Though they started as an elite fighting group at the service of a creator-type god figure known as the Master, they ultimately proved to be incompetent fuck-ups. And after destroying the wrong planet, they were banished to this planet, planet Earth, which at the time was basically worthless and had no human beings on it. As the story goes, GWAR ended up killing the dinosaurs and also altering Earth's landscape and accidentally creating humans by having sex with apes. One of their worst mistakes. Eventually, GWAR becomes frozen in Antarctica for several eons before being thawed out in modern times. They realize then that the humans they created from sexing the apes have taken over the planet, and so GWAR sets out on a mission to enslave and torment them. And that is where a GWAR show picks up. On this tour, the shows have a through line about a dinosaur named GWAR, who was originally introduced on the 1992 album America Must Be Destroyed. That was their third album, and they bring GWAR back not only for this tour, but also for a new EP, which is called, of course, The Return of GWAR. Now, spoiler alert, I guess, A lot of scenarios around the GWAR plotline are kind of non sequitur, but there is still a GWAR plotline, which really did keep the show escalating. Here's the spoilers. It seems they basically kill GWAR 3 different times at 3 different ages. Though, unfortunately, I only got pictures of the full-grown GWAR because I still suck at YouTube. But for the first one, they euthanized him pretty much out of the egg, which is both funny and kind of emotional for someone who had to put their dog down recently. Anyway, the new EP comes with a comic book, which I guess goes a little deeper into the GWAR mythology. I'm thinking I should buy it. So I mentioned in the intro that this lineup does not contain any founding members of GWAR. The last founding member to be involved was Dave Brockie, who portrayed the character Odorous Arungus and passed away in 2014. After that, they retired his character, Odorous Arungus, and he was replaced as the lead vocalist by former GWAR bassist Michael Bishop as the character Blothar the Berserker. Bishop had originally played bass in the band as Beefcake the Mighty from 1987 to 1993, and again in 1998 and 1999. Beefcake the Mighty is still around, but is currently portrayed by Casey Orr. So the GWAR show I'm talking about was at Mill and Mine in Knoxville, Tennessee on July 31st, 2026. This show correlated with Knoxville's Creepy Con event, where GWAR was, I guess, signing autographs and doing like meet and greets. And it was, as I understand, kind of an outlier from their current tour schedule. This was the third GWAR show that I have seen, and I think maybe the best. The first I saw was in 2010 at the Bonnaroo Music Festival in Manchester, Tennessee. I was actually working artist transport at Bonnaroo that year and ended up driving for both Dave Brockie and guitarist Corey Smoot, who portrayed Flatus Maximus. Both of them are now dead, actually. Corey Smoot died just over a year later in 2011 from a blood clot while on their tour bus. And with his death, the character of Flatus Maximus was retired. So anyway, I'm glad I got to see at least one show from the Brockie era. The second time I saw them was also at the Mill and Mine, like this most recent time, but that was in 2019. And while that was a good show, I felt like this one in 2026 hit a little harder and was a bit more evolved theatrically. I mean, they still used a lot of the same imagery, like politicians being hacked up and all that, including both Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. Excuse me, Bill Clinton. You know, them Epstein boys. But there were definitely some more current bits and pieces this time as well, including an ICE agent who gets cut in half, a Kristi Noem character who took a very uncomfortable level of verbal abuse before having her boobs ripped off. And, of course, 3 different iterations of GWAR, which were all pretty impressive feats in puppetry, I think. Though, again, I only got pictures of grown-up GWAR because I suck. They also covered Pink Pony Club. A little gimmicky, but I filmed it, and it is a great song. So here's a piece of that.
Tennessee, always alive. Mama, help me Saturday. I can hear your southern drawl 1,000 miles away. Take God, what have you done? It's a big part of that. You don't have to.
There was also this other thing. This thing that kind of sucked the air out of the room. This thing that kind of took us just outside the GWAR universe into something a little more real, a little more visceral, if you can believe it. So here's the deal. Basically, there was a part where a certain prop was introduced. A little more flexible than a mannequin. It looked like the body of a young child, maybe 7 or 8 years old. And the character portrayed by how should I say this? He diddles this kid, and not in a cartoonish way, like humping or oral through the clothes, but like he went down the pants and was doing a kind of jacking move, which went on way too long, so long that I did see a few people seem to exit, though they might have just chose that moment to go to the bathroom. I don't know. I wasn't keeping up with them. But it felt weird. The whole thing felt weird. Even weirder when another member, who I can't recall in hindsight, joined in to the diddling. But then the bit was interrupted by the character Balsac the Jaws of Death, played by Michael Dirks, who very vocally took issue with it. There was a little bit of dialogue that kind of softened it from the GWAR side a bit. Basically, they stated that the kid was dead, saying that you can't get older than dead. And also, I'll add that the mannequin doll did have a fabric, like, rabbit mask covering the face, which maybe made it a little less fucked up feeling, maybe. But anyway, Balsac the Jaws of Death basically took the context into a very real place or real feeling place, talking about how they had been doing that bit on tour and he was sick of it. And he basically spent a long time talking about how he thought it was wrong and fucked up, and saying that he was basically done with GWAR if they were going to continue that bit. Again, this lasted too long to be comfortable. It lasted too long to feel like it was part of the bit. The fact it lasted so long made it seem very, very real. It's like they pushed the disturbing feeling to the very edge until Chönyid replied to Balsac's comment by basically saying, "Well, what's wrong with it? The president does it." And from there, they went into a song. I'm not sure which. And at the end, Balsac concluded something like, "Oh, well, I spoke too soon." So, okay, the bit stands and it had a concluding point, but I got to reiterate that the way they let all that hang in the air like that was pretty novel. By making something so visceral seem so real and then introducing a critique of how visceral it actually was, they were really able to wrap the audience, or the bohabs, in this truly off-putting feeling. They made sure everyone in the room was truly disturbed beyond all the blood and guts before attributing that action, and thus the feeling, to the president. Say what one may about that method, but it was some pretty effective art. Pretty effective theatrics. And no, I didn't get any pictures of that part because I was paralyzed by what I was seeing, just like everyone else. But okay, let's get back to the blood and guts. Mild cholestation aside, let's talk about how comparatively unshocking the blood and guts are in 2026. At least unshocking to the people who came to dance in the blood. I think it would still be pretty shocking to the uninitiated. I do think GWAR is one of the more subversive acts of our time. And side note, subversive means tending to subvert, or having a tendency to overthrow, upset, or destroy. When I asked Gemini who the current most theatrically subversive musical act was, it said The Residents. To its credit, ChatGPT said Liebach. Anyway, performative violence is not new. Even before the Greek tragedies from the 5th century BC, there was ritual combat, there were ceremonial sacrifices, and I guess a lot of that was maybe real violence, but so were the Roman gladiator games, so were public executions. So really, I'd say GWAR is more aligned with theater than straight spectacle. No one is going to GWAR to see someone die in service to the law or a king, but rather to see the law and kings die in service to GWAR. And though certain acts of violence were often part of the story in medieval morality plays and in Renaissance theater, I think the most direct ancestor of GWAR is the Théâtre du Grand Guignol. This was a theater in Paris, France that ran from 1897 to 1962. Though their shows were not generally supernatural in context like their predecessor, the seance-style horror theater known as Phantasmagoria, the Grand Guignol did primarily depict extremely graphic simulated bodily violence. Brains being scooped out of heads, nannies strangling children, gouging eyes out with scissors. You know, that kind of thing. And then, of course, once cinema became a thing, all bets were off. Plenty of monsters and atrocities to put on celluloid, but I think professional wrestling is also there on that line that runs between Grand Guignol and GWAR as well. So Grand Guignol, professional wrestling, cinema, GWAR. And eventually video games too, I guess. I think that's how it goes. And yeah, Alice Cooper and G.G. Allen are up in there too, predating GWAR. I know. The timeline is not fully exhaustive. But anyway, why do people want to see this type of stuff? I think some people may be quick to attribute it to a catharsis for a suppressed animal nature. But really, in nature, animals aren't naturally that carnal. I mean, chimpanzees, for example, will kill their own species in competition, usually for territory or a reproductive advantage, but not for sheer amusement. That appears to be uniquely human. To commit, simulate, or otherwise seek violence for the sake of entertainment. But then again, in the case of GWAR, what is this entertainment actually showing us but the destruction of human beings who use their financial and political power to compete for territory and a reproductive advantage? So, could it be that we are subconsciously competing like the chimpanzees, but just don't have access to our opponents, and therefore celebrating the impression that GWAR does have that access and acts upon it? Could it be that on a primal level, we are all sharing a dream at a GWAR show where the law of the jungle may at least feel like it's working in our favor? That if the exploiters and abusers of the world can excuse themselves with an argument that might makes right, then maybe someone mightier than them, namely GWAR, is the ultimate answer. If word becomes form, then maybe there is some kind of hope in the story of GWAR. Hope that a system built on violence and terror will collapse under its own weight. hope further that said system will come to be ridiculed instead of feared. And on that, I want to point out this clip from when GWAR was on the Jerry Springer show in the 90s, and how Brocky, as Odorous Orungus, explains the function of GWAR. Check it out.
Why does it have to be so violent?
What is more dangerous, woman? The evening news, which is chock full of the death and the war and the hatred that the governments of this world have forced onto our people. Shows like Cops, things like football, people injuring and killing each other, or something like GWAR that is totally making fun of all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a solid argument, and I'll add that it's accented pretty well here by Danielle Stamp as Slymenstra Hyman.
There always is black humor in times of change, times of revolution. I mean, it's been all throughout history and all throughout literature.
Okay, hold on a second.
So, okay, on one hand, there's the exercise of our physical, base natures played out on stage at a GWAR show. But might there be some related activity going on in the etheric as well? Maybe even drawn from the etheric. Okay, so if you've watched my other videos, you may know that I am big on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I've brought it up in the context of live performance before. See this video about wet leg. Long story short, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a description of the process a person goes through between death and rebirth, or death and liberation from the cycle altogether, if that's your path. The events of the Book of the Dead are very similar to a lot of near-death experiences, and also people's trip reports of dissociative and deliriant drugs. Now, if there is reincarnation, then there is also most likely habitation of realms in between our lives, even if temporary. Though, given the potential of the collective soul, these realms may be inhabited concurrent with the lives that we know, but operating on other planes. Who really knows? But if these realms are real, then it seems we're all connected to them together in similar ways. And if we don't currently inhabit those other realms, maybe because our brain is filtering them out, then perhaps we still remember them from when we were there. Because if we know one thing from our current vantage point, it's that time seems to move forward. If past life memories can be retained, then why not past death memories as well? And this is where I think we may also consider that GWAR is retrieving something directly from the death realm's Chönyid Bardo and reflecting it back in the hologram of the collective consciousness. Okay, so what is the Chönyid Bardo? This is basically the span of afterlife between death and rebirth. So just to break it down real quick, in total, there are 6 Bardos. There's the Chönyid Bardo, or the Bardo of life, which is what we're all doing right now. It's the one reality we inhabit from birth to death. Then there's Milam Bardo, which is the Bardo of our dreams and that state we experience in sleep. There's also Samten Bardo, which is the Bardo of meditation. So, okay, those are all up above the surface or maybe down in the matrix. I don't know. But the other 3 are steeped in the underworld or afterlife. Among those, we have Chönyid Bardo, which is the Bardo of dying itself. That's the movement into death where the light of liberation becomes available to you. Then is the Chönyid Bardo that we spoke of, which is known as the Bardo of Dharmata, or the true reality, which is actually just pure potentiality. That's the opposite of the Matrix, but we'll get into that. The last one is the Sidpa Bardo, which is basically the Bardo of rebirth, where the consciousness is being pulled back around to the Chönyid Bardo, the Bardo of living, for another go. All right, so when you die and you move through the Bardos of death, you have multiple chances to escape the life-death cycle and become liberated. The first is the appearance of that light I was talking about in the Chönyid Bardo. According to the Book of the Dead, you can literally just go into that light and you're free. No facing karma, no reincarnation. You're back out to the field, direct to nirvana. But if you miss that, then the next 2 chances at liberation appear inside the Chönyid Bardo we keep talking about. And this is where GWAR comes in. In the Chönyid Bardo, the consciousness can face 2 different types of deities. First the peaceful, then the wrathful. Though it should be noted that they are technically the same deities, but with a quote-unquote changed aspect. The wrathful deities are the peaceful deities in a changed aspect. And in each case, for either aspect, it is the consciousness of the deceased that is creating or projecting these deities. If the deceased fails to recognize these as their own projections, they will continue to the path of rebirth, basically hung up on the idea of the physical. However, if the deceased does recognize these deities as their own projections, then they can basically merge with them, merge with the deities, and be liberated from within the Chönyid Bardo. Now, the peaceful deities are described as brilliant and beautiful, translucent spheres and shit like that. And the trick for liberation is to look at them and not see them as gods separate from yourself, but rather as extensions of yourself. But with the wrathful deities, on the other hand, the trick is not to see them as hostile enemies to be feared, but again, rather as extensions or projections of yourself. And if the peaceful deities appear as beautiful crystalline objects floating in space, then what do the wrathful deities look like? Well, they look like GWAR. Okay, so there are 58 wrathful deities in total versus 42 peaceful, and almost all of them are abusing corpses, ripping off their heads, tearing their bodies open, wearing accessories made of dead bodies, eating their lungs, eating their hearts, holding their intestines, holding dead babies, drinking blood from skulls, and carrying around human scalps. Not only that, but like GWAR, some of the wrathful deities carry around big-ass weapons, including battle axes, swords, trident staffs, plowshares, and clubs. One of them, known as the White Karima, even uses a corpse as a club. Hell yeah, dude, badass. As you can see, there are some definite GWAR vibes there, though the descriptions of the wrathful deities often include multiple eyes, hands, feet, and faces for some of the earlier wrathful deities, and a whole lot of animal heads for the later ones, specifically the 28 mighty goddesses. And they got all sorts of animal heads. They got elephants, dogs, snakes, vultures, bats, scorpions, cuckoos. For some reason, cuckoos. Which I don't know, that's cool. Cuckoos are cool. I don't know a lot about them. And then get this. If the deceased fails to recognize these deities as projections of their own, then the violence and gore just keeps increasing. And yet, as GWAR is approachable to us because we know it to be fiction, The Book of the Dead ensures us that the violence of the wrathful deities is basically also fiction. Specifically, it states the following: O nobly born, when such thought forms emanate, be thou not afraid nor terrified. The body which now thou possessest, being a mental body of karmic propensities, though slain and chopped to bits, cannot die. Because thy body is in reality one of voidness, thou needest not fear. The bodies of the Lord of Death, too, are emanations from the radiances of thine own intellect. They are not constituted of matter. Voidness cannot injure voidness. So then, what if the whole esoteric function of GWAR and violence as entertainment generally is not to realize our animal natures, but rather to revolutionize our spiritual natures? What if it's all to prepare us for the chance we meet those wrathful deities, so that when we get there, we don't fear it? Maybe we even love it. Is GWAR protecting our souls? Yeah, I feel like I'm going to die, then maybe miss the light on a first pass, and then I'll see the peaceful deities and be like, oh, it's the flaming lips. And then I'll see the wrathful deities and I'll be like, oh, now GWAR is playing. Cool. So, okay, fictionalized gore and violence has a spiritual function, but what about real gore and violence? I saw a lot of people after the show absolutely drenched in the fake blood. I should have gotten some pictures of them, but I always feel like it's kind of weird asking strangers for photos. My friend I went with, he got pretty covered too, so I should have thought to take one of him, but I'm dumb. Either way, some people were so covered that it was borderline off-putting. But hey, all in good fun and a collective experience. So I went home and started working on this video to say all the things that up until this point I have already said. But then, a few days later, I heard in real time that the celebrity gossip person Perez Hilton was self-harming on a live stream. I assume most everyone has heard of this by now, but when I learned, it was either still in progress or it had just freshly happened. And I don't normally seek things like that out, but I also didn't expect it to be as hardcore as it actually was. You know, I went to rotten.com back in middle school. I saw some Faces of Death VHS tapes. I flirted with the Daniel Pearl video and a shotgun unaliving or two. I figured old Perez was probably just cutting up his forearms. Like nothing worse than the intro on Slayer's Live Intrusion video. But no, it was way, way worse. It was really bad. It was a lot more blood than the Live Intrusion video. I watched Perez do 3 big slices across with that knife. He was making sounds that more resembled those of sexual pleasure, and I was out with regret that I watched it in the first place. And I actually spent the rest of the night really worried about the guy. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even do the things I had planned for the night because it was kind of stressing me out. I was like in on something truly nightmarish before the news broke, even before TMZ got there, but also before the video was squelched. Now, though this might have passed muster at a GWAR show, there was something very affecting in knowing that it was not fiction. There was something very affecting in seeing real, true human suffering. And yeah, there are plenty of videos from Gaza out there that also fit this category. I'm not trying to exalt one example above the other here, but I'm using Perez Hilton's ordeal because I pretty much saw it live when it was happening, and more important to our discussion here, it was self-inflicted. It didn't come from indoctrination of prejudices against others or a supposed duty to one's state. It was a projection from inside Perez Hilton's consciousness onto his external body. That's a very short distance for an internal projection to travel. So what do we make of this? Because most people would not claim GWAR to be a projection of their consciousness, but rather a projection of the consciousnesses of the members of GWAR. Likewise, most people would not consider Perez Hilton's actions to be a projection of their own consciousness, but rather of his consciousness. But then again, what consideration can be made for the collective consciousness here? The one we share and build our world with every day. The one that still witnesses the violence, more or less whether we like it or not. Is it fair to say that the members of GWAR, as with all life itself, are projections of the mind of God, or rather the master in GWAR's lore? And would this itself not be a projection of the collective consciousness if that master is the source of all things? Odorous Arungus is a projection of Dave Brocky, who is a projection of the collective consciousness. And if it applies to him in GWAR generally, then it applies to Perez Hilton as well. Perez Hilton is a projection of the collective consciousness, and his self-harm is a projection of the wrathful deities he has created inside himself. So then, at least by proxy, if not ultimately directly, since it all comes from voidness anyway, the wrathful deities, GWAR themselves, and blood-covered self-mutilating Perez Hilton are all projections of our consciousness, collective or individual. Now, I'm not telling anyone how to feel about Perez Hilton. On one hand, I believe people can change and redeem themselves from past behaviors. But on the other hand, he earned the enemies he has fair and square. He victimized other people when they were at their own low points in their lives. But hey, GWAR has victims too. The costume people they bleed out on the stage. And judging from all the corpses being slung around and eaten, it seems apparent that the wrathful deities of the Book of the Dead also have victims. And sometimes the victim is you. But are these victims even really third parties? Again, voidness cannot injure voidness. The victims and oppressor are one, dual roles in a single story. The same people who crafted GWAR's costumes also crafted a Bill Clinton with removable head and blood fountain. The same Perez Hilton, who proved the might of the pen against others, would only later use the might of the sword against himself. Is everything not interlocked into one grand projection? A seed of thought whittled out over eons into an ornate tapestry connecting all things. A projection that is as peaceful as it is wrathful, again, depending on its aspect, depending on the part you are observing at that time, depending on the part you are projecting at that time. And is the chain of observation to projection and back to observation again not itself some kind of perpetual motion machine? Like the chicken and the egg, we don't even know what was first, the observation or the projection. But we need every piece for it to function. No missing links in the story we build together. So when we see GWAR playing music and spraying blood, we celebrate because we recognize those wrathful deities as projections of our own, as fictions. It becomes a seemingly shared experience, part of our collective and communal consciousness, and a ritual for erasing our fears and neutralizing our suffering, if only for a time. But when we see someone such as Perez Hilton seeming to suffer individually, alone in his body and engaged in self-destruction, it hits differently. But it's ultimately from the same source, the void. Perhaps the difference is that when we come to see GWAR, we know what we're there for. Not only are we prepared to face the wrathful deities, but we paid to face them. But Perez Hilton surprised us. His show was free and isolated, and a reminder that for the wrathful deities to be projections, then they must be within us in the first place. But when all is said and done, if the emotional element is removed, the stories are objectively pretty much the same. Blood everywhere, cartoonish violence, the victimizers as victims. And if you had never heard of GWAR or Perez Hilton, could you actually tell their projections apart? And more importantly, will you understand them to be only projections later on when they're your own? I guess as with most things, practice makes perfect. And perhaps there will come a time where the wrathful deities stand before you, drinking blood, shredding corpses. And maybe by then, you will have the knowledge and experience behind you to look at them and say, hey guys, can you play Immortal Corruptor? Okay, like and subscribe. Buy my book. Link in description. Bye.